Welcome, everyone, to the annual Gandhi lecture. We're here to discuss and celebrate Ramachandra Guha's the publication of the concluding volume of his monumental biography of Gandhi, entitled Gandhi, The Years That Changed the World. Here we go. You can see it. I just got my copy, though I did read a previous version. So before introducing our speaker and interlocutor, I would like to just thank the people that have made this annual lecture, Gandhi lecture, possible. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Dr. Praveen Bhatt and the Bhatt Family Fund that has generously provided the forum and money for this event for over a decade. We're especially grateful for Dr. Praveen Bhatt's long-term support of the South Asia Council, especially given his own association with the Gandhian movement and the Indian freedom struggle. It has always lended a poignancy to this event in particular. I'd also like to thank, of course, Kasturi Gupta, our program manager, and Amr El Haider for putting all of this together. And they, of course, wanted to make two announcements. One is that this event is being recorded, and it will be available on the Yale YouTube channel, so please don't feel the need to record your own version. And also there is a reception, a dinner following this event, which is just upstairs, and you're all welcome to join. So it is an enormous pleasure to introduce and welcome Ramachandra Guha. Ram has had a long and distinguished association with Yale, which we are very grateful for. First coming to Yale as a researcher in agrarian studies.
No. Agrarian studies did not exist.
Sorry, before agrarian studies.
I first came as a visiting lecturer in the forestry school.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And as you know, that was also the time of Ram's first incarnation, we might say, of his many interests and pursuits. And as an environmental historian, his first book, based on his PhD, was, of course, a path-breaking book on the Chipko movement called The Unquiet Woods, Ecological Change and Peasant Resistance in the Himalaya. From those early, and of course, pioneering work, but also continuing environmental work, Ram has expanded his domain and interest very widely. So from that, over the last 2 decades, he's really, of course, established himself as a major social, environmental, political, and cultural historian. And I would say many of you may know, especially, the pathway-breaking work, India After Gandhi, The History of the World's Largest Democracy. It came out in 2007. It was an award-winning history of India since independence, and it brought together, in a way that has been particular and consistent, of this extraordinary ability to bring archival breadth and depth, punctured with very interesting, you might even say, focusing on idiosyncratic and charismatic biographical portraits of key figures in that story, as we'll see also in other stories. And also just written with such an extraordinary narrative energy. I always remember reading that book, which it was a political thriller, of whether Indian democracy would survive. It was awarded many awards, but also named as Book of the Year, and on many lists, including the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and The Economist. Alongside that career as a political historian and commentator, as we know, Ram has also made his name as a biographer. So in addition to this 2-volume biography of Gandhi, and first and again extraordinary biography of Verrier Elwin, Savaging the Civilized, Verrier Elwin, His Tribals in India. Of course, as another incarnation, we know, and many of you may know Ram as a historian and commentator on cricket. Most famously, The Social History of Cricket, called A Corner of a Foreign Field, The Indian History of a British Sport from 2002. And probably most recently, in the last decade, Ram is known to everyone as one of the most preeminent columnists, preeminent and admired columnist and commentator on contemporary Indian politics, with regular columns in major newspapers and syndicated across the whole series, but from the Hindu, the Telegraph, to the Indian Express. It's a wide and extraordinary range of interests and careers. Of course, for us at Yale, we've been lucky that in addition to teaching, occasionally for us, he's taught in many other universities, including the University of California at Berkeley, the University of Oslo, London School of Economics. But as we say, we've been lucky to have Ram teach with us over the last 2 decades. And most recently, I'll just end by naming some of his most prestigious awards from the 2015, the Fukuoka Prize for Contribution to Asian Studies, of course, the Padma Bhushan in 2009, India's third highest civilian award, and for us at least, most importantly, in 2014, Ram was awarded an honorary doctorate in the humanities from Yale University. So please, before we start the interrogation, let's thank Ram for joining us this year.
And before Karuna begins the interrogation, I'd like to say how delighted and happy I am at Yale, because Yale was formative in my intellectual development, and some of the people responsible for that are in this room. But Yale also saved my marriage. And because I'd just been married after 5 years of courting my wife, and we were living in Calcutta, and the School of Design gave her a scholarship to do a master's, and I was left bereft in Kolkata. And somehow the forestry school had a position for me. So among many other things, I'm grateful to Yale for that.
Wonderful. So just so you know, the structure of this event is going to be a little bit different. The book has just been released, as all of you may know, and hopefully some of you have copies on October 2nd here in America. In India, it was released September 11th to mark, as Ram likes to remind us, a different September 11th, which was the day of the burning of the fingerprint cards in South Africa as the beginning of one of the major satyagrahas in South Africa. So what we're going to do today is it's going to be partially a conversation, a set of questions for the first half hour, 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up to more questions. If in the middle of anything that we're discussing you have an urgent question, please feel free to raise your hand and join the conversation. So the first question I'm going to ask with is something that I've always it's a sentence that begins one of my favorite collections of your essays, An Anthropologist Amongst the Marxists, which I'm sure I've quoted to you before, which begins, inside every thinking Indian, there is a Gandhian and a Marxist struggling for supremacy. And then it goes on to name a number of Indians, but I'm sure Ram considers himself a thinking Indian, so I'd like to start by asking him if he can remember what first kindled his admiration or struggle with Gandhi, and then some sense of when you had your first inkling that you would take on this project.
So it'll have to be partly autobiographical.
Yeah.
And I went to Calcutta to do a PhD in 1980, shortly after the first left front government came there. And my teachers were Marxists of different hues. It was, someone once said that, I forget who it was, it may have been, I think it was a famous American neoconservative who was a leftist, Irving Kristol. I think he said once, the most interesting part of the Soviet Union in the 1930s was alcove number 5 of the City College of New York. Because in the Soviet Union, you couldn't have debates about Stalin versus Trotsky and Lenin and Bukharin and Zinoviev and so on. That was going on. And the most interesting center of world communism in 1980 was Kolkata. Because in China or in Cuba or in Vietnam, it was decided one way or the other. And of course, in America by that time, if you talked about communism, you were what Indians today would call anti-national. So there was very interesting, incredibly interesting debates going on between different varieties of Marxism, and I sort of participated in that. And of course, I discovered Marx, the great social scientist, and so on. And through a series of accidents, I decided to work on the environmental movement. And I wrote, as you pointed out, I began work on a history of the Chipko movement. And in the summer of 1982, I went to Gopeshwar, which is in the upper Alaknanda Valley, to meet the pioneer of the Chipko movement, Chandi Prasad Bhatt, who was and is an extraordinary man. He's one of the greatest living Indians, who's in his mid-80s. He's a social worker, a reformer. He campaigned against untouchability. He worked for gender equality, and he pioneered the Indian environmental movement. An amount of extraordinary simplicity, transparent honesty, and phenomenal knowledge. Not just of his, he's really an organic intellectual who also knows the world. And I was really struck by this. And I came back and discussed my encounters with these radical Gandhians in the Himalaya to my Marxist friends. And these Marxist friends stopped me and said, wait a minute, the Chipko movement is trying to hug trees to stop deforestation? Yes. And those trees are for the paper factories in the plains? I said yes. But won't the paper factories create the industrial proletariat that will lead a revolution? So your friend Chandri Prasad Bhatt is a reactionary. And that first got me thinking that there was something problematic with dogmatic Marxism, and introduced me to, in a sense, a Gandhian alternative or a Gandhian critique. And, I think Marx remains a great social scientist. I think even in the 21st century, no one studying social science can afford to ignore Marx. But no thinking Indian or no thinking American, indeed, should be bound by Marx. So Gandhi helped me grow out of this. And through these early encounters with environmentalists, there were others. There was someone who's better known than Chandri Prasad Bhatt, who's the extraordinary Medha Patkar, the leader of the anti-dam movement in central India, who has played, in a sense, a globally defining role to emphasize the rights of those displaced by large development projects. But I came to writing about Gandhi much later. It was through my historical research. Elwin had a very problematic relationship with Gandhi. He joined Gandhi. He was an English priest who sheds both his religion and his nationality, becomes an Indian, starts working with tribal people, falls in love with an English girl who's working with him, and writes to Gandhi for Gandhi's blessings. Gandhi says, fine, you can marry Mary, because both of you are wonderful social workers, but you must practice celibacy after marriage. So he abandons that, Mary leaves and comes back to England and so on. And then Elwin has a very complicated relationship with Gandhi, a very interesting, unusual, almost 25 years. Though Gandhi spoke about tribals, he spoke about women, he spoke about Muslims, he never spoke about Adivasis or tribals. I beg your pardon, he spoke about Dalits, he spoke about women, he spoke about Muslims, but in Gandhi's imagination, tribals were some sort of Hindus lost in the forest. They didn't really have a distinctive cultural or social identity. So it just emerged over these 20 years of researching other subjects that Gandhi was with me everywhere. And I finally decided I must settle accounts with him.
Very good. And I think one of the things that's really striking is, of course, you started writing this biography of Elwin, and I always think of India after Gandhi as a kind of biography of Indian democracy, where India is a kind of protagonist in that story. But Gandhi is an interesting figure to do a biography, another biography, because as you know, in some ways Gandhi, there are many famous biographies of Gandhi. Gandhi himself writes his most famous book is an autobiography. He writes a lot, as you know,
absolutely,
and he writes very publicly, and he publishes a lot. So there's a quite, often you think of a biography as unraveling secrets of some kind that haven't been placed before the public. So I think, so in a way it's a fascinating but maybe daunting because there have been so many, and difficult to think of what would be the new story. So I guess this is one of the questions I wanted to ask, is why you wanted to revisit Gandhi as a biographer, and maybe partially an opportunity to maybe say something. In the book you say, distinguishing this account from recent, and one of the things you say in the book is that the last great biography was probably Rajmohan Gandhi's biography, Gandhi, the man, his people, the empire. But before that would probably go, and you said these are also generationally an older set of writers. So I would like, so maybe say more about what you think a biography does for you as a writer, as a way to interrogate Gandhi as a person, and what you think your biography, what differentiates it from.
So you're absolutely right, Karuna, that, my previous work had been in more kind of, how do I put it, more sectoral thematic subjects. And even India after Gandhi, historians weren't writing after 1947. So in a sense, I had no competition. Right. But with Gandhi, there were these hundreds of books, and some of them were actually quite good. And I thought a lot. So I was hesitant for a very long time. So I knew I had to write on Gandhi. I knew absolutely that I had to write on Gandhi. And I thought but how would I do it? So I first thought I would write a book on the afterlives of Gandhi. How he's interpreted, misinterpreted, reinterpreted today across the world. Then I thought maybe I'll write a book called Arguments with Gandhi. Gandhi's arguments with Marxists, Hindutva-vadis, Ambedkarites, feminists. Then I said, hang it, let me do a biography. And then I thought it would be a 1-volume biography, and then it became a 2-volume biography. Now, what convinced me to to think that I had something to say in the biographical mode were really three things. One was that I had been thinking, living, and arguing with Gandhi from when I was a very young man. So I had 30 years of reflecting on Gandhi, reading about Gandhi, and reading also all the vast secondary literature on Gandhi. As these books came out, I would review them and think about them. The second reason was what you mentioned. Every generation of Indians needs a fresh assessment of Gandhi, just as every generation of whatever, French people needs a fresh assessment of de Gaulle and so on, right? So the third reason, in some ways, was the most important, that in the course of my research on the environment, on Elwin, on political history, even on cricket, I discovered a whole range of sources about Gandhi that went well beyond the collected works. For example, Letters to Gandhi. The collected works collects everything Gandhi wrote, and it had a team of very great editors, the kinds of editors you won't find certainly in India today. So I discovered that there were letters to Gandhi that were housed in the Sabarmati ashram, tucked away in these cupboards. And they were often incredibly illuminating, some of which he replied to, some of which he did not reply to, but from a variety of people across the world, and some respectful, some querulous, some really critical. Then there were newspaper accounts, intelligence reports, and cartoons. Just in the course of my work, I found that you could illuminate Gandhi from many directions, not just from his collected works. And finally, there was a very large collection of Gandhi's papers that were in the possession of his last secretary, who was with Gandhi when he died. And when Gandhi died in Delhi in 1948, this person, who was a devoted Gandhian called Pyare Lal, decided he would be to Gandhi what Boswell was to Johnson. So he went and collected all Gandhi's papers, but kept them to himself and showed it to no one else. And while the collected works were going on, at the same time as Pyare Lal was writing this multi-volume biography of Gandhi, which never finished, the collected works were being edited in a different part of Delhi. And the chief editor of the collected works, a great scholar called K. Swaminathan, said, when it came to guarding his materials on Gandhi, Pyare Lal was like Othello guarding Desdemona. So these papers were opened only a few years ago. So I had the great privilege to have access to a very large collection of Gandhi's own papers. So I think for all these reasons, I decided I must have a stab at writing the 501st or the 5001st biography of Gandhi, whatever it is, but I must settle my accounts with the man. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think one of the things that comes through in both these volumes, and again, I think as a comparison to India after Gandhi, is as a person, a scholar of Gandhi too, the collected works are daunting, but
yes.
also and 100 volumes, depending on how you count.
Yeah.
But they also are just one-sided, so you
yeah,
don't
yeah.
You neither get the correspondence, but also, as you say, Gandhi as an editor or a public editor who's writing constantly in his journals. These journals themselves are also receiving enormous amounts of letters, and I do think what you capture is, in a way, a certain kind of contemporaneity of the debate, of how people were perceiving Gandhi in that moment, after that particular statement, and given that he had so many arguments. I think that is one of the things that this kind of biography, which is not retrospective in some way, it's really trying to go with each moment.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to, I guess one of the things I found very interesting, and it's something that you seem, a lot of other books you want to frame. So I would say two things. One thing, I think a lot of your, also your editorials and other smaller pieces are interested in giving a biographical account of slightly unknown or lesser known figures of some kind, and building an archive of fleshing out especially in the political world, but a number of characters, and as sets of interlocutors. So not just a singular figure, but who they're in, and so you can think of just the names of the most recent series of books you made, The Makers of Modern India, as a set of arguments and a set of texts and figures wider than just Gandhi, Nehru, etc., Democrats and dissenters, and patriots and partisans. So again, a kind of opening up. So I wondered if you could say a little bit about, in this, especially the second volume, the two, at least seems to me, there's probably three sets of these arguments that kind of trace through the whole book. One, Gandhi, and at least in your version, his two most important antagonists, the figures that he never convinces in some ways are Jinnah and Ambedkar.
Correct.
They play key figures. The others are, in a way, the coterie of his closest people, and Pyarila is one, but really Mahadev Desai, who was an extremely moving portrait, I think, comes through in your book about this. He called himself the shadow, or and Gandhi's. Gandhi's also sort of a shadow in the sense, literally, of the person who was holding him up in some ways, but also hidden from public view. But I want to start with the third set, which I think it's the people who are closest to Gandhi politically in some ways. It's Rajagopalachari, Vallabhbhai Patel, and Nehru. And I think somewhere you say Gandhi calls them the heart.
Not Gandhi, just an anonymous correspondent to Rajaji says
yes,
this.
It calls them the Nehru's the heart, hand, and head. Is that the order though? Yeah. Heart, hand, and head. Yeah. So Nehru's the heart. Patel's the hand, and Rajaji's the head. So I guess I wanted to ask you if you, to me, maybe say what you think about them, their interactions with Gandhi in some ways, and the way you wanted to present them, because I think what comes through is they're all very close to Gandhi, but they're all very different figures, and they have very different relationships with Gandhi and amongst themselves. So
that quote, again, this is the joys of working in an archive. What you'd find, it was a letter written to Rajagopalachari by a Tamil in the 1950s after Gandhi died, saying, just an unknown Tamil, just a postcard I found in the Rajaji papers. Nehru, Patel, Nehru, Sardar, and you were the heart, the hand, and the head of Gandhi. It was a fantastic image, and of course, Mahadev Desai was all three, but we can talk about Mahadev Desai later. I mean, unfortunately, he's been written out of the whole story. They are all, Rajaji comes into Gandhi's life first because he meets him in Madras on one of his early trips. I think 1917 is when they first meet. Then the same year Patel comes in, and Nehru a little later. I think Rajaji and Patel are about the same age, a little less than 10 years younger than Gandhi. Nehru is much younger. Rajaji is the one who's the most intellectually alert and sophisticated and direct. So, for example, one of the episodes in the book talks about Gandhi's involvement with a brilliant and gifted Bengali writer and poet called Sarla Devi Chaudhrani. He was enchanted by her, and she was enchanted by him. And the question was, where is this relationship going to proceed? And Rajagopalachari tells him, look, you have to choose between leading the freedom struggle and following your romantic instincts, and persuades him to abort that relationship. Though in many ways, that relationship hangs as a shadow for a very long time. Again, Rajagopalachari is the one who, much later, in 1942, when the Quit India movement happens, Rajagopalachari tells Gandhi, do not start this movement. The British will go anyway. They'll be exhausted by the war. This will alienate them. This will alienate the Muslims. It will polarize the Muslim League and the Congress further. So do not start this movement. Nehru says, look, Hitler is evil. Because actually Nehru was an anti-fascist well before Churchill became an anti-fascist. I think this should be put on record. And so he tells Gandhi, look, the British are bad, but you cannot play into the hands of the Japanese by launching a movement at this stage. But finally Nehru is persuaded by Gandhi to join the movement. Patel, on the other hand, is the hand. He says, I am ready for the last fight with the British, and I will organize everyone. And he makes his speeches in Gujarati, going across, Ahmedabad, Bombay, and say, this is Bapu's last fight, because Gandhi is almost 75, and you must be with him. So they all have very interesting, complicated relationships with Gandhi. And in this book, actually, in some ways, I haven't counted the index entries, but probably Rajaji and Patel are as important or more important than Nehru, because in most accounts, it is just Gandhi and Nehru, right? Mm-hmm. And they're all extraordinary people. And of course, each deserves, Rajmohan Gandhi has written very good books on Patel and Rajaji too. Yeah. And they're both top class books, but I think it would be nice if some younger scholars would revisit Nehru, Patel and Rajaji and give us fresh perspectives on them.
Yeah, one of the things I found just fascinating is...
One last thing. Yeah. Again, they vary a lot in terms of Gandhi's social policy.
Yeah.
So Nehru is most committed to Hindu-Muslim harmony. So he follows Gandhi most directly there. Rajagopalachari, although being a Sanskrit-speaking Tamil Brahmin, is the only one of Gandhi's colleagues who takes the battle against untouchability seriously in the Congress party. He is the only one who recognized the force of Ambedkar's challenge. Patel is a brilliant organization man, and without him the Congress would not have been built. So even in terms of Gandhi's larger agenda, they have different perspectives.
I think that's what's so striking is Rajaji is the one who is closer to the only one. Yes, as you say in the book, comes up very clearly. He's the only one who Gandhi knows that he's the one to turn to write anything on caste, or takes his opinion on the anti-untouchability campaign very seriously. And both Patel and Nehru, who are clearly his successors in some form, are the ones who are more interested in, they're more easily persuaded by Gandhi when Gandhi wants to act.
Yeah,
so they're
yeah.
there. I mean, they're the hand and the heart of action.
Yeah.
And of course, in some ways, Patel is the closest just geographically and Gujarat,
and linguistically.
Absolutely. Familiarly,
Yeah.
but actually in other ways, he's neither the hand, he's the hand, not the head and the heart, which is interesting. Yeah. And the final question on Nehru, which I think is the question that's still, in a way, is still a mystery. Is in a way, Rajaji again is close. You see why they're close. They are figures that come into Gandhi's life very early. They're attracted to Gandhi. Nehru is too, but as I think one of the questions that always is still, profoundly interesting to rethink is, what was it? What did Gandhi see in Nehru?
Yeah.
Maybe we can guess in some ways what Nehru, given how, in a way, how sociologically they're the most different.
Correct.
In some ways. I mean, as you say, they're both similar in that maybe they're both genuinely all India leaders. They're both cosmopolitan in their own very particular way. But Nehru is, comes up in a social world that's very different, education-wise and perspective. So what do you think that Gandhi saw in Nehru that committed him, maybe early on, but also repeatedly, committed him to really believing that Nehru is the right heir, political heir?
Yeah, let me answer. That's a wonderful question. Let me answer that with an anecdote that is not in this book because it's unsourced. It is to do with Sevagaram Ashram in about 1940 or 41. And there's a meeting of the Congress Working Committee, and the war is on, and the Battle of Blitz, and Hitler is persecuting the Jews, and XYZ, and Japan has bombed Pearl Harbor. And the meeting ends, and everyone leaves to take their trains. And as Nehru is leaving, Kasturba tells him in Hindi, "Bhagwan tumhara saath hai, God be with you." At which Nehru loses his temper and says, "What God? Would God allow Hitler to rise? Would God allow the bombing of it? Would God, what?" So everyone is appalled because no one has talked to Kasturba like this. Yeah. And Gandhi says to Ba, don't worry, Jawaharlal is closer to God than any of us. Okay. Now, it's a wonderful, I don't say it in the book because it's unsourced, but there was a kind of warmth and charm and humanity about Nehru, that I think appealed to Gandhi. The cynic would say that it was, a social climbing and he wanted to be with a rich, well-dressed Western guy like Motilal, but I don't think. I think it was partly the personality. There was a charm and a warmth and an appeal to Nehru, and that is clear. But beyond that, there was what you point to, Karuna, that Rajaji was a conservative South Indian, Patel was a conservative Gujarati, Rajendra Prasad was a conservative Bihari, among his other. Nehru had a capacious vision. I think after Gandhi, he was the one Congress leader who was not parochial. And not just parochial in linguistic sense, in a religious sense, also in terms of gender. I mean, in that whole lot, he was in the entire Congress party, he was the only male apart from Gandhi who believed in gender equality. And of course, he had more radical views than Gandhi on that subject. And I think this must be part of this, all of this. And also he was much younger. The fact that he was younger than Rajaji and Patel meant that he felt he could take his legacy on further, even though they disagreed, as you said, profoundly on science, on economic development, on technology, on industry versus agriculture. And he says very early on that Nehru will succeed me. Later on he says, after I'm gone, Nehru and Patel, in that order, will succeed me. So I think these are the various reasons I think that he essentially anointed Nehru.
Yeah, no, it's so wonderful.
And also Nehru was incredibly popular. Again, I should say this, because there's a myth, there's a kind of story that is very active on social media about how Patel was denied the presidentship of the Congress party in 1946. Now what happened was actually this. There was the secretaries of the PCC, right, that is of the secretaries of the provincial Congress committees. Out of 15, 12 wanted Patel, but all had been appointed by Patel. If you ask the deans of a university, to say something about the president, you'll get a certain kind of reaction. If you ask the faculty, you'll get a different kind of reaction. If you ask the students, you'll get a different kind of reaction. And Patel knew, this is very important. I mean, this is a facetious analogy, but in the context, Patel knew that the secretaries were loyal to him because he had appointed them. If the vote went to the All India Congress Committee, which had 1,500 members, it had voted 800 or 900 for Nehru. If it went to the Congress membership, it had voted 85% for Nehru. I mean, there's a wonderful anecdote in Rajmohan Gandhi's book on Patel, where they've come for a rally and everyone is there, and Patel says, a kind of mixture of wistfulness, admiration, and perhaps sorrow, they have come for Jawaharlal, not for me. Right. So I think Gandhi knew all of that too.
Yeah, and of course, as a precursor to their relationships, Rajaji, Patel, and Nehru, and post-Gandhi, of course, it's a fascinating setup to seeing how they diverge politically after. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned, of course, and this will get back to the Jinnah and Ambedkar, is you say every generation needs to revisit these founding moments, these founding figures. And of course, I think strikingly, as you've written about, and we might all think about, is we're probably living in a moment when the founding fathers and they were fathers, they're women too, but the founding generation, independence itself has come under enormous public criticism as a failure of some kind, and maybe even a cultural moment in which repudiation is the common field we live in. And so I guess, and Gandhi and Nehru probably are the two most, the figures whose public reputation, I mean, maybe Nehru, I think you would even have said Nehru maybe has sunk the furthest, or there's been the most seesawing of his public reputation from 47 to now. Gandhi's a bit, maybe it's more of a, I don't know, an evacuation of something of what Gandhi represents. So I guess one question I wanted to ask is, but on the other hand, of course, we know Ambedkar is probably the one figure whose reputation has really soared in the post-independence, as opposed to the contemporaneous reputation, which was much more bitter and much more negative, and also partially because Ambedkar's he wasn't the same kind of popular political figure then as he is now in the general political consciousness of a much larger number of Indians. So one thing I wanted to just ask is so in that sense I felt like reading this, it was important that two things to say. So Gandhi is of course the great figure who talks, as we always say, he talks a lot about moderation and compromise, but produced an enormous number of people who were bitterly angry at him. So he talked a lot about how you convert people, how you get them to try to win them over. He tries, and people always write about him being both wily, and they react. They either fall for it, as we know, the set of people who are just devoted to Gandhi, as we've just mentioned. But there's quite a few who also never follow. Aren't people who are charmed and then run away. It's either you fall or you run away. So I guess I wanted to So and Jinnah and Ambedkar seem to be these two figures who were always never persuaded by the charms in some form. So I guess one thing I wanted to ask is in a little bit about, in the book they sort of run as parallel relationships, but maybe if you wanted to say what you think, it seems important now, those relationships matter because they matter politically, those legacies of those relationships. So what did you want to say that you thought was distinctive or corrective of how people portray those conflicts and figures?
So, we talked about, how biographies are written differently in different generations. And after finishing this book, I realized that Ambedkar looms much larger in Gandhi's life than Jinnah.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if a book had been written 25 years ago, Jinnah would have been the natural antagonist, and Ambedkar would have been somewhere. In fact, in Attenborough's film, Ambedkar doesn't figure at all. All right. Now, just for example, but even in scholarly biographies, Jinnah, in the earliest scholarly biographies, Jinnah is much more important because that's the failure of Gandhi, to keep a united India, and that's the ambition of Jinnah or the success of Jinnah. But in this book, Ambedkar is much more important, and this could be partly because I'm writing it in 2018 and these debates are alive. It could be partly because I found a lot of new material on Ambedkar. So what I've tried to do in tracking the Gandhi-Ambedkar relationship is, as you say, not use retrospective judgment, but let it unfold as it did in clear historical time, And from their first meeting in 1930 to Gandhi's death in 1948, which Ambedkar comments on in a private letter to his, the person who was to become his wife, I trace the complexity and the nuance of the relationship. And they're both extraordinary figures. I mean, I think the book, the anthology of mine you mentioned, Makers of Modern India, it has 19 people. And only 2 get a second innings, Gandhi and Ambedkar. Right. There are 2 chapters at different parts of the book. So they're absolutely extraordinary. And, history placed them as rivals. And it had to. A guilt-ridden upper caste reformer and the emancipator of his people. They had philosophical differences, they had economic differences, but ultimately, I think the historian must say, and the Democrat must say, they contributed jointly to the undermining of this obnoxious social practice. Maybe Ambedkar contributed more, but no upper caste Hindu did remotely as much as Gandhi to challenge untouchability. And one of the failures of the Gandhian movement after independence is that no one took this about. I mean, Nehru, as a socialist, thought class was important, not caste. Vinoba Bhave, in whom some think is Gandhi's successor, never in his entire post-independence career talked either about the abolition of untouchability or Hindu-Muslim harmony. So, upper caste Hindus after Gandhi let him down. But so that's a separate story. But in the course of their lives, I mean, it's a very interesting, complex relationship. And one of the historians are interested in small things. Political theorists think that these are inconsequential. What is all this? Right. Not you, but others. All right. But one of the most joyous moments in my research was to discover how Ambedkar joined the cabinet. So Ambedkar and Gandhi had been fighting for almost 2 decades. And the Congress reviled Ambedkar, called him anti-national, said he's an apologist for the British, he's the Viceroy's Executive Council, whereby in jail and so on. Ambedkar, as you point out, had a very complicated and bitter relationship with Gandhi. And the conventional, but yet, in 1947, there's the Cabinet of Free India, dominated by the Congress, and Ambedkar is law minister, and also a Congress-supported member of the Constituent Assembly. And the conventional wisdom is this is Gandhi's large-hearted generosity, and he told, there's even a folklore story that has been told in several biographies, that no, Gandhi told Nehru and Patel, freedom has come to India, not to the Congress party, so get Ambedkar. And I bought this, and I've actually even some of my earlier writings also followed this line. But in the course of this research, I found something really interesting, that Gandhi and Ambedkar were arguing bitterly through the 40s, up till 46. Patel and Ambedkar had even more bitter arguments, and there's a savage letter that Ambedkar writes to Patel, saying, you elevate Gandhi as a Mahatma, but for me, he's a human being, Patel wants to forge a pact with Ambedkar to sideline, to marginalize the Muslim League, United Front against the Muslim League. So he reaches out to Ambedkar and they have this disagreement and it falls apart because of Patel says, how dare you? Patel says, so there's this interesting correspondence where Patel is saying, this is how we can ally. Our parties can join, we can give you these many seats, we can have this policy and affirmative action. But having said that, so we can certainly need a compromise. But having said that, I must say as a congressman, I remain bitter about all the epithets you have flung at our Mahatma. And Ambedkar realizes, saying, everyone is a human being for me, And if I have disagreements with them, I state them. I'm not a bhakt. He does use the term bhakt, but he would have meant that, right? Okay. Now, I don't cravenly worship people. Yeah. And then it so happens that while this is going on, it was an extraordinary Gandhian called Amrit Kaur, a Sikh woman who had converted to Christianity, who was very close to Gandhi from the 30s, was in the first cabinet, was in the Constituent Assembly, is sitting with Ambedkar in the Minority Rights Committee, gets along with him and tells Gandhi, please bring him aboard and I'll find a way of bringing him aboard. And of course, as the biographer, I speculate that, Ambedkar, here was a woman from a minority community. So Ambedkar clearly felt much less patronized by her than by an upper caste male like Gandhi or Nehru or Patel. Right now, but the fact is that this is one of my really interesting discoveries, which I'm proud of. It has, as I said, it has no bearing on political theory or world history or whatever. But I like the fact that it was not Gandhi's, it was not Gandhi's magnanimity, but the intervention of one of his alert female colleagues that got Ambedkar in.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I think that part of that story is interesting on 3 accounts. I mean, because as you say, so there is, obviously, between Gandhi and Ambedkar, there's a political and philosophic debate. And that's clear, they are on different sides. But there is also a very embittered personal enmity of some kind, and it does actually, when you see those letters in 46 and onwards, Gandhi is convinced that there's no way to reconcile with Ambedkar. In fact, he and Patel is the one who is trying to come up with at least a temporary political solution. And as you say, what actually irritates Ambedkar about Patel is that he mentions Gandhi in the middle of it. So in fact, so it's nothing like what we expect, because you expect that Patel again comes off as someone who is extremely pragmatic in these terms. I mean, he's never raised any deep concern about the untouchability issue, but he's also the most willing to negotiate with Ambedkar for practical reasons. And it breaks down because he mentions the book on Gandhi. So I think it is a very different story, where Gandhi is actually more bitter, and there's less likelihood of him and Ambedkar coming to any agreement when Ambedkar does come, and it's not magnanimity. So I think that is a very important correction. But I do want to. We'll start opening it out. So I wanted to see if there's. I do wonder. Reading it too in this sense. So I think Jinnah, Jinnah and Gandhi knows why he irritates Jinnah. In fact, that's a nice thing you say. He remembers. He's like, I think he's been mad at me since 1915 when I told him to speak in Gujarati at a public event. So I think he's, since then I've always rubbed him the wrong way. So and they're both Gujarati. They're from the same part. So there's some way in which they both. He knows that he irritates, and I think Gandhi never He has a kind of abstract way of telling us why Ambedkar is irritated by him. He said, of course, Ambedkar would be irritated because he's an untouchable, but it's he doesn't actually ever fully acknowledge, that Gandhi also he's very personal in the way he describes Ambedkar as being unrepresentative. He's an educated, he doesn't. So there's that I think Gandhi is still a little bit more, he's not as self-aware about the personal ways. He just thinks Ambedkar is a very difficult personality, and I don't know how to reach him in some form. So, so I think that comes off very well too. So is there something, so the last question I wanted to ask was if you wanted to say something about Desai, because this is another figure, as you say, that no one's written about, and if there was something, I think to me, the poignancy of the last section of the book, there's a lot of other things that we'll hopefully open up, and more, especially the private life of Gandhi here that's there too. But the second half, especially from the jail term from Quit India, it does seem like this moment where Gandhi loses so many people he's close to, and really, from Mahadev to Kasturba, to C.F. Andrews, Tagore, all of these people who had been with him in this very long period. And the last, Gandhi at the end is this figure who is much more tragic in a way, because he doesn't seem to have any, those people who were his roots have all disappeared in some form. So he's... so I think there is something where you don't, it almost feels like it's a different Gandhi that comes out of jail with a different purpose, something like that.
So before I answer that, I think you said something very interesting, and I think absolutely appropriate about Gandhi and Ambedkar, that he understands at one level the roots of Jinnah's animosity towards him, but with Ambedkar that's never so, and maybe I should have probed that a little more in this book, because listening to you, it strikes me it's analogous to his relationship with his children.
Yes.
Ambedkar is 23 years younger than him. So how dare he, though he's, obviously Gandhi is a polite man, he's still inside, he's the direct confrontation, a Hindu patriarch, and I suppose many Hindu patriarchs today, maybe myself included, I have a son, I find it problematic by someone 20 years younger than you challenging you in this way, right? Yes. So certainly it happens. So I just stuck with listening to you, maybe I can't make this book any longer, but maybe I'll write. But thank you for that comment. Maybe I'll write a column on it. Thank you for that. And thank you also for that provocation.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that Mahadev was an extraordinary figure. He's in many ways the hero of this book, apart from Gandhi. There are many other characters, because he joins Gandhi in 1917, and since you mentioned Nehru and Patel, and everyone here knows about Nehru and Patel, unlike Nehru, Mahadev was a great scholar of Gujarati literature. So he shared Gandhi's cultural and moral and linguistic world. Unlike Patel, Mahadev was a cosmopolitan. He knew global politics. You know, he would read something and tell Gandhi. He probably told Gandhi about Marx, for example. You know, so he had that extraordinary intellectual vision, but he was rooted in Gujarat. He was a man of great, selflessness. But he was also, as Gandhi says, I love you because you, among other things, you cook such good khichdi for me. All right. Okay. But he could argue back with Gandhi and, of course, translate, intermediate, save his time from fussy people. I have a quote where someone says that, Mahadev saved 5 years of Gandhi's life by keeping him away from unwanted visitors. And he was an extraordinary person. I mean, he was really Gandhi's head, heart, and hand, maybe, all together. And his death in 1942 devastated Gandhi. And as Karuna says, he was really, in many ways rootless and without an anchor after. And Kasturba dies just a little later.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask one question, but I'm gonna want to encourage people to start asking questions. So there are 2 microphones. So start thinking of your questions, and maybe even if you're ready to walk to them to ask. And the question I'll just ask, and it will hopefully open it up, is one of the things you end the book on, which I was very curious, because the book ends in a way with thinking about Gandhi's legacy outside of India, more than Gandhi's much more, in a way, contested legacy in India. So I wanted to see, this will, I'm sure it'll come up in more ways, but what do you think, what would we say about his legacy in terms of, Gandhianism was, in some sense, still a political force, arguably, till the 70s, maybe until the JP movement, Vinoba, these were 2 different political heirs of Gandhi. Obviously, in environmental movements and many other social movements, Gandhianism is there in some form. And in politics, too, Gandhian tactics, we know, are everywhere, but usually not in the way that Gandhi may have expected. But there's probably no political force that takes... Gandhianism isn't really a political force.
Correct,
so... So is there anything you want to... what do you think of as maybe key moments that were the end or the change of that legacy, or the living legacy, or what brought about a more profound contestatory relationship to Gandhi?
So, I think if you look at the trajectory of Gandhi's influence in India post-independence, I think his martyrdom in some ways gave breathing space to Nehru and his colleagues to promote the idea of a secular plural India. But then Nehru died, his party fell in the hands of his family, it became corrupt, and there's been a rise of Hindu majoritarianism. Now, it's some historian would have to write on, you can think of the short-term, medium term, and long-term origins of Hindu majoritarianism. The long term is, of course, from the Arya Samaj movement and the anti-cow slaughter movements of the 19th century. The medium term would be the Ayodhya dispute, and then, of course, the Congress corruption and the rise of Modi. So that aspect of Gandhi is, even the Congress wants to be more Hindu than the BJP, often in a vulgar way, not even in a deep philosophical way, right? No one in the Congress reads Radhakrishnan or Aurobindo, for example, right? So I think that aspect has gone. In terms of his attack on untouchability, the Dalits have owned as their own. And it's absolutely right and just that Ambedkar has replaced Gandhi as the emancipator of the Dalits, right? Now, gender equality, I think there's regression going on the last 10 or 15 years. So in many respects, what is attractive about Gandhi and appealing about Gandhi is on the decline. I mean, there's also, as someone living in Bangalore, Gandhi and Nehru were both committed to linguistic pluralism. I mean, they detested the idea of Hindi being imposed on everyone, and that is also now facing a challenge. But, and it's interesting to compare. I just was thinking the other day aloud that, see how Pakistanis treat Jinnah. Now, Gandhi died 6 months after independence, or 5 months. Jinnah died a year and a bit. Now, Pakistanis don't, by and large, Pakistani intellectuals and activists don't engage with Jinnah in an argumentative or combative way. Jinnah was the founder. We wish he had lived longer. If he had lived longer, we may not have gone in this direction. The military may not have come, Islamic fundamentalism may not. Now, on the other hand, Gandhi is a figure of intense debate and argument. actually, as I've written in the past, that if you write any kind of scurrilous book on Gandhi, it will never be banned, because there's no one there to defend him. You can't criticize Bose harshly and go to Bengal ever again, right? or likewise with Ambedkar and the Dalits, or Savarkar, the Hindutvawadis, and so on. So it's very interesting. They are, as you say, there are elements in the environmental movement, in the social reform movement, and so on. But essentially, but maybe the world will own him. It's possible that Gandhi's fate will be like that of the Buddha. The Indians kick him out, and the rest of the world owns him.
Very good. So please, we'll take questions or comments.
Hi. So I have a question about, can you comment on how the Rowlatt Act actually brought a lot of people together? It seemed like it was one of the central points in and Gandhi's role in that.
Yeah, that's a very good question. There's a full chapter on it. So I can only answer it in brief, and I hope you get the book. But next year will be the 100th anniversary of the Rowlatt Satyagraha. And so the chapter on it is called Going National. So Gandhi in 1918 organizes specific movements on agrarian issues in Champaran and Kheda and mobilizes workers in Ahmedabad. And he's now tested his teeth with Satyagraha in India. And then in 1919, there is this very obnoxious piece of legislation passed, which basically is harsh and draconian in prohibiting freedom of expression and gives juries the power to arrest and deport people, and Gandhi launches an agitation against it. And there's a full chapter on that, right? Now, what is interesting, again, for the biographer, details are important. Now, at that time, the great Indian leader is Tilak, who is many years older than Gandhi, who has an honorable lineage, who has been to jail, has in several years in Mandalay, has suffered, and Gandhi is very much junior to Tilak in the Congress hierarchy. Now, it so happens that early in that year, early in 1919, Tilak goes to London to fight a libel case. And the libel case drags on and on and on, because the British courts then were like the Indian courts now. Right. So it drags on and on and on. And while he's away, Gandhi emerges as the leader of the Rowlatt movement, and it's an extraordinary movement. And this massive Hindu-Muslim joint support. I mean, I quote some excerpts of these processions everywhere going on. In April 6th, 1919 is the day on which the Rowlatt Satyagraha begins. And there are meetings all over India. A week later is the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Gandhi is actually going to the Punjab, he stopped, and the massacre happens a few days later. And then, of course, the whole country erupts, and the British rule. With that massacre, British rule has no moral leg to stand on at all, right? And then, so 1919 is definitive. But Tilak is away. What if Tilak had been there? Would I have written a 1,000-page book on Gandhi? Who knows? Right. Now, so it's a very interesting moment even in Gandhi's biographical trajectory. By the way, there's a very good book on the Rowlatt Satyagraha, which came out 50 years ago, edited by my former director, Ravinder Kumar. It's called Essays on Gandhian Politics. It's a wonderful book. It's really the first good social historical study of Gandhian movements is this book. So have a look at that.
Thank you for the great talk, Dr. Guha. I just wanted to know your, Mr. Gandhi's thoughts on the likes of RSS and Hindu Mahasabha back in the 1920s and how that changed, if it did.
So there's a section, so the Hindu Mahasabha, he of course broke with the Hindu Mahasabha, and the Hindu Mahasabha detested him. And through the 30s and the 40s, the Hindu Mahasabha was really a marginal force. In the late 30s, Savarkar becomes president of the Hindu Mahasabha. And Savarkar and Gandhi go back a long time. In the first volume, I talk about the encounters in London in 1909. And Savarkar absolutely detests Gandhi. He has a personal hatred for Gandhi, and indeed his writings on Gandhi reek of absolute jealousy. But it's a marginal force at that stage. Now the RSS comes in much later, and I have a section in this book which I urge you to read, which is about how the RSS's ideological hatred for Gandhi. This is based on police records, which I was the first to see, and these deal with the months August, September, November, December 1947. And they are speeches of Golwalkar, on whom Mr. Narendra Modi has written an adulatory book, in which Golwalkar says, we have to kill every Muslim in India. And only Gandhi stands between Muslims staying here and going to Pakistan or being killed. And people like Gandhi and Nehru are stopping this creation of a great Hindu state. And we don't act like that, but if we wish, we have the means to get them immediately silenced. This is a verbatim record of Golwalkar's speech in December 1947. This does not mean that it is the RSS that kills Gandhi 2 months later. I mean, Godse may have been a freelance. But we don't know, right? But the point is that this is the battle. There's something else. Again, this is bringing it to contemporary. I wrote an op-ed in the Financial Times over a week or 10 days ago. And since all of you are Yale students, you can get it from behind the paywall, which I can't do, right? Okay. So there's an op-ed I wrote in the Financial Times on Modi's misappropriation of Gandhi's legacy. So there's nothing in our prime minister's ideological, organizational training to prepare him for anything but detestation of Gandhi. But our prime minister is an ambitious and intelligent man. And he knows that Gandhi is the only Indian recognized globally. So he's now started a Gandhi 150 and he's invoking him here and there and so on. But their worldviews are profoundly incompatible. I mean, there can be no meeting ground on the question of, the RSS wants to create a Hindu Pakistan. And Gandhi gave his life to oppose that vision. Yeah.
Hi. It's always such a pleasure to. Sorry. I'll just speak out loud. This is such a pleasure to always hear you speak. Just wanted to ask you a clarificatory comment on. Just a question on the linguistic pluralism aspect.
Yeah.
Because my understanding of Gandhi was that he was in favor of having Hindi as the Raj Bhasha, not the Rashtriya Bhasha, about 15 years, 16 years after the English leave. If anything, it was in his debates with Tagore, and Tagore was saying that this should not be the case. So why would you say that?
That's a good question. The debates with Tagore are described in great length in this book. The debates with Tagore are described, and they are again extraordinary and very rich debates. There's a slight difference between what you said and what actually happened, but it's very important to go into this. Gandhi was opposed to the English language, and he said that's a mark of slavery. And so Tagore said absolutely not, and he said, you can learn English and reach the world, and you can speak Bengali or Hindi. And Gandhi was at the beginning of that debate, Gandhi was a bit of a xenophobe, and he moves towards a more inclusive cosmopolitan position through his debates with Tagore. Later on, Gandhi says that once India becomes independent, every major language will have its own state. So he reconstitutes the Congress from being the Bombay Presidency Congress and the Madras Presidency Congress and the Bengal Presidency Congress to being the Maratha Congress, the Kannada Congress, the Malayalam Congress and so on, right? So, but he thinks that Hindi will be a linked language. He wants every Indian to learn Hindi. Of course, he does that, right? But he does not want it to be imposed in this way. And of course, his great disciple Rajaji, in 1937, he becomes Chief Minister of Madras and promotes Hindi because Gandhi believes every South Indian must learn Hindi. The Tamils oppose it. And there's a lot of Rajaji then 2 years later demits office. By the late 1950s, Rajaji changes his mind and opposes Hindi and says that if we must learn our own language, but if we need a linked language, it must be English because it's neutral. And this is in a later book. There's a wonderful debate between him and Lohia, which is then in Makers of Modern India. And again, a wonderful line of Rajagopalachari is when the Hindi zealots are imposing Hindi on South India, he says, if Saraswati was the goddess of language, she gave birth to all languages, including English. Which I like very much, by the way. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your talk, your work, and this new biography. I have nothing but great admiration for Gandhi and for his life work and his influence on King. I'm raising something that might be awkward, but
Please.
You answered it at LSE a few days ago, and
Yes,
The Guardian reported on it.
Yes.
And I'm asking it because my students are now asking about it. And
Yes.
so this is his tendency in later years to sleep with women who are naked.
One woman.
One woman. Okay.
I think facts are important, yeah.
Good. But and you said then that in that LSE
Yes.
response that it's inexplicable and inexcusable,
That's
which I
right.
very much appreciate. And I
That's
just wonder, for the sake of my students who are asking about
Yeah,
this as
yeah.
well, what else might you
Yeah.
say about it?
So there's a whole chapter on that. It's called the strangest experiment. That's what the title is, which is an allusion to Gandhi's autobiography. Right. Now, of course, it's inexplicable. It's indefensible. As a historian, I have a new piece of information to share for the first time in this book. This was his grandniece, who saw him as a mother. She wrote, at Gandhi. In fact, I don't know whether you saw the piece in the Guardian which talks about some of this. Right now, there was someone in Gandhi's ashram who was lusting after this young woman, and was insisting that she marry him, they have sex, and so on. And she wanted to test her celibacy too, having been reared in this, in the Gandhian world. Now it's, but at the same time, even if she was partaking in this experiment, it was clearly asymmetrical because of age and familial and all of that. So absolutely, I call it the strangest experiment, and it was you could call it an abuse of power, though he was testing his lack of sex rather than lack of sexual desire than the other way around, which is, it comes towards the end of his life. It comes when he loses all these colleagues, and I talk about that in the book. I say, Mahadev would have told him, are you crazy? Kasturba, if she had all of that, right? So it is, and it is also an act of vanity. You see, there's the other aspects to this. I'll come to the vanity bit in a minute. You see, it's not just 2018 and how we need to reconfigure gender relations now. It's not just that. It's also something to do with different religious traditions. And this is something I argue in the first volume of my book, because there it talks about Gandhi embracing brahmacharya or celibacy. Celibacy is completely antithetical to the Protestant version of Christianity, and to Islam and to Judaism. And incomprehensible even to atheistic men and women in the 21st century who come from that background. All right. However, celibacy is fundamental to the moral and theological world of Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, and some aspects of Catholicism. Right. And I think that is part of how Gandhi sees his project. He's greatly influenced by his Jain teacher and so on. But in this last experiment, also there's an act of vanity, which I talk about, that Hindus and Muslims are butchering each other. And he thought it's because of his personal failures. So he wanted to test himself. So, which is why inexplicable and indefensible. But it's part of a very large and complex life lived in the open. I end my book with a quote from the poet Paul Valéry, saying that, all of us keep our lusts and manias to ourselves. Gandhi made even those public. Right. And if he kept anything out, the editors, the collected work, said by Professor Swaminathan, put it all there. And as a biographer, I've also published unpublished letters. So, like with Dr. King, and there are many things to criticize about Dr. King's personal life, since you mentioned Dr. King, right? And rightly so, right? Both at the time and later. I think you have to see this life in the round, and certainly, I would not defend it. And there's a whole chapter on it based on new material, so please read it. Yeah.
Can I just follow up very quickly? So I'm going to say one thing, and there's one question here and one here. On this, so there seems to be two, as we said, Gandhi lived a very public life, and in fact, he wanted these experiments too. He had wanted to describe them and talk about them publicly.
Yeah.
But I once read that N.K. Bose refused to when he would talk publicly about them, and he didn't want them to be public.
But everyone knew about them because they were going
yeah.
on. Yeah.
So, but he didn't want to translate each night. He wanted to include it in his prayer meeting.
No, he talks in a prayer meeting, in which the collected works, a quote.
Yeah.
He said the prophet was always with young women. He says this,
But
talking to Muslims.
is it the case, though, that they weren't included? I mean, some of this material in N.K. Bose, I think My Last Days, those weren't publicly available until the 60s and 70s.
No, because
right?
the collected works only started in 1958.
Yeah.
But N.K. Bose was his secretary.
Yeah.
So there were two people who with him, both of whom left over this, and both their private and public lectures are quoted in this, and they later, actually felt that they had been whatever. N.K. Bose wrote a book. N.K. Bose was an extraordinary Gandhian scholar. Who wrote this, who did the first serious anthology of Gandhi's thought, called Studies in Gandhism. He was an anthropologist who went to jail many times and so on. And then he was Gandhi's secretary in Noakhali. And he wrote a book called My Days with Gandhi. And that book, his earlier books had been published by Gandhi's own publisher, Navjivan. By this time, Gandhi was dead, right? Gandhi died in 58. Nirmal Bose's book comes out in 53. He submitted it to Navjivan, and Navjivan said, remove that stuff about these experiments. So he published it elsewhere. Now, if Gandhi had been alive in 1953, who knows? But the Navjivan suppressed it. But the collected works put in all the speeches which are there.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Guha, for your wonderful conversation. And I must also thank you that I really enjoy your work. I'm a Naga, a tribal from Nagaland, and I'm so therefore compelled to ask here a question, especially in the light of your comment that the first, I think, comment on Gandhi really did not know how to go about with tribal or Adivasis, or they were really not in his world. But I also, in your book, India After Gandhi, there was that chapter, Tribal Trouble, and you have written very sympathetically about the Nagas, and you have mentioned about Gandhi's own statement to the Naga leaders when they went to visit him. So I wonder if you can imagine, and I'm looking forward to read this book, if you can imagine had Gandhi not been assassinated when the army came in 1956, whether the situation would have been different with the Nagas, if you can imagine.
No, thank you for that question. You know, again, these are things that you find in the course of your research. Just as in the course of my research, I found that Ambedkar is more important than Jinnah in this book. In the course of writing India After Gandhi, I found that the Nagaland issue had been with us as long as the Kashmir issue, and as intractable. And these were two unreconciled parts of India in which the Indian state had used arbitrary and excessive force. So actually, through the book it runs, Nagaland and Kashmir, right? So absolutely, absolutely. And what would Gandhi, you know, it's a very difficult question, because you know, I think Gandhi would certainly have argued for reconciliation, you know, but serious and honorable reconciliation. When could this have been possible, and so on and so forth? He would have deplored the excessive use of force by the Indian army. But I think he would have also deplored armed struggle by the Nagas. I think because that would have been inconsistent. He would have said Satyagraha is what you should do, right? Okay. So it's hard to say, but clearly going beyond Gandhi to the history of the Indian Republic, those are our two failures, you know, in terms of us communicating the legitimacy, the authority, and even just plain decency. In Kashmir and Nagaland, we have failed, you know. And in Nagaland, I think there is a glimmer of hope now. In Kashmir, things are getting worse and worse and worse for complicated reasons, including the fact that there's a third party involved. But Gandhi would certainly have, I mean, if he had been in there in the 1950s, he would have deplored the excessive use of force by the Indian army for sure. But he may have also preached non-violence to the Nagas.
Could you comment on Bacha Khan and the red shirt army?
Yeah, there is some stuff here. There is a discussion of Bacha Khan. There's also a beautiful photograph of him. So have a look. With him and Mahadev Desai. It's a beautiful. It's a wonderful photograph. There are two photographs of Bacha Khan actually, as it turns out, because one a rally in the Northwest Frontier Province in '37 with all these Congress white shirts and Bacha Khan and Gandhi in the podium far away. But there's a lovely photo of, it's just, I don't know, it's too far away for you to see, but anyway, it is taken on a morning walk, you know, Gandhi's morning walk. Bacha Khan has gone to Sevagram, and there is Gandhi, there's one other colleague whom I couldn't identify, there's Bacha Khan, 6'7", with a hand around Mahadev, who's 5'6". It's a beautiful photograph. I mean, it's just I mean, I don't know whether we can find it, but there is a fair, you know, these are all people who deserve their own proper biographies. I mean, there's a good anthropological study. Here, have a look. This is too far away, but there's Bacha Khan with his hand around Mahadev. You know, so he was someone. There's a good anthropological study by Mukulika Banerjee called "The Pathan Unarmed." All right, on the Pathan struggle and so on. It's a lovely title too. But there is no good biography yet. I mean, I stand corrected if there are people here from Pakistan or Afghanistan. But, he was an extraordinary figure. He was someone who spent, a decade and more in British jails and a decade and more in Pakistani jails. Right. He felt betrayed by the Congress because of the 46 referendum and what happened. And, it was, Pakistan happened, but they were marooned there, far away. I wish there was a biography of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, as some other people in this book. Yeah. Who? Maybe I'll look for it. But
And then
I recently interacted with an African lady, and she told me that Gandhi is racist.
Yeah.
I was a bit dumbfounded, and she asked me, "What are your opinion?" So I told her that my knowledge is pretty limited, but as far as I know Gandhi, he was a very dynamic character. He kept reading, kept improving himself. The best example, I told her that his views on casteism, probably he wanted Dalit people to be part of Hindu mainstream society. Whoever joined his ashram was made to clean toilets, but somehow deep down he could not get rid of he still believed that it was Dalit's job to clean the shit. So that was my response. I'm not sure. What will be your comment on that, and how should I counter answer?
I can't advise you on how to counter people. You can read the 2 volumes of my book if you have the patience. But actually his views on caste evolved. And this second volume talks about that. His views on race also evolved. When he goes to South Africa in 1893, he's a racist. As a 23-year-old Indian, he's a racist. But he sheds some of his prejudices in South Africa. He sheds them further and further when he comes back to India. And I describe in this book visits by African Americans to him in his ashram and what they take back. One of them is the great Howard Thurman, who was a mentor to King later. So there's he has comprehensively shed his racism. He changes his mind on this, right? My books are very fat, but please read a short book by Anil Noria called The African Gandhi, I think it's called. It's a very good book. It's about 60 or 80 pages. It'll be there in the Yale library. It's probably there online too. Ask your friend to read that book after you've read it.
Thank you, Ram, for a really excellent presentation. I have 2 brief questions. One, that as you've so beautifully described, there were very intelligent discussions, debates, both within parties, or mainly the Congress party, among what you might call very tall men in a sense, not by height, but by the intellect and so on. We have a complete absence today of any kind of intelligent debate, either within parties or across parties.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, how is it that there were so many people during that whole period who respected each other, had great differences, but could discuss and debate intelligently? We can't do that now. And just a second sort of a suggestion, maybe you should now take up a project on Nehru to rescue his reputation.
Well, somebody better qualified than me is at work on the second. And we hope to see his work soon. Karuna knows who it is. So I think there are some fine scholars working on Nehru. And rescue Nehru's reputation and separate him from his descendants. And allow me to tell one of my favorite lines on this, which comes from my great mentor, the sociologist Andre Bethe, who said that Nehru's posthumous career reverses the biblical injunction. The sins of 7 successive generations have been retrospectively visited on the planet. Okay. So I think, but somebody's at work on it. Somebody's at work on that. It comes from my Andre Bethe with acknowledgement. On the first, that will need a separate discussion. There are many reasons. I think part of it could just be historical, Rakesh. Karuna used the term founders, and I've used the same term. The American founders, they had rich and productive debates. I'm sure the French Revolution, rich and productive debates. In the 20s and 30s in China, rich and productive debates. When a nation is formed, is formalized, it consolidates itself, debate moves outside the realm of politics into the academy and social work and journalism and thinkers. So part of it just may be that. But there may be other reasons. It may be the structure of Indian politics, that you have to be incredibly rich and corrupt to become an MP, or the son of somebody incredibly rich and corrupt. Right. So there are obviously structural as well as historical reasons for this. But Nehru needs to be rescued. But I still believe that a fair and proper and just appraisal of Nehru, which will be received in a fair and proper, just way by readers, can only happen when Rahul Gandhi retires from politics. I believe it seriously. Yeah.
Hi. You said that the upper castes let down Gandhi in terms of the untouchables and their policies towards them, and I assume that's an allusion to Congress. So do you think that's ever going to change in the future, especially seeing the growing power of the BJP and the RSS?
So I don't think I was alluding only to the Congress. I was alluding to upper caste in general. And again, there's clearly a parallel with this country. I think there's some extraordinary parallels between King and Gandhi. One of them is that the freedom marches, right? Okay, had white people too. And there was a question about the roller satyagraha. The roller satyagraha had Englishmen in it, right? So both King and Gandhi stoked the human being in the oppressor. And maybe they touched 5% or 10%, doesn't matter, right? But so Gandhi also, the upper caste reacted to this while he was there, inspired by him. But then they betrayed him. They went back into their prejudices. Then of course affirmative action happened, and there was a counter reaction to affirmative action. Affirmative action also took distorted forms and so on. So, I was not so much referring to the Congress party as, you see, in Gandhi's view of the Congress party, one part of the Congress party would run governments. The other part, or one part of the freedom movement after independence, once independence came, one section of leaders like Nehru and Patel would be in the secretariat running a just government. The other part, consisting of his ashram disciples who were social workers, reformers, who worked on rural development, on craft production, on gender rights, would be outside the government doing civil society activism. That did not happen. So, and then of course, because I think, if you look at the whole, this is, as a historian, this is how I understand it, that social change takes place when there's pressure from above and below, just as men have to be feminists too. And, it goes up and down, right? With every few years you find women organized for equal rights in every sphere, and some men are convinced, some men are ashamed, and others are not at all. So it's an ongoing process, and Gandhi would have been deeply disappointed by two aspects of what happened to Indian politics and social life after independence. One is the failure to absolutely insist on interfaith harmony. And the other is the failure to continue the battle against the obnoxious aspects of the caste system. You have to be happy with other things. We are a democracy, we have elections, we have more women in professional life and so on. You would not have been entirely displeased with India today. But I think these are two things you have to worry about. Yeah.
So what was it about Gujarat at that time that generated so many important leaders? Why Gujarat rather than other states?
Well, can you name some?
Well, Patel and Jinnah and Gandhi, all three of them came from Gujarat.
Rajagopalachari, Periyar, Yotitas from Tamil Nadu. All right. Phule, Ambedkar, Tarabai Shinde, Tilak, Gokhale from Maharashtra.
Fair enough.
Bengal, C.R. Das, Bose, etc. from Bengal. Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay from my state, the greatest Indian woman produced in the last 200 years. So don't be parochial. All right? That's what, yeah.
Could you please comment on the nature of relationship that Gandhi had with Kosambi Senior?
Well, I have a long essay on it in another book. So please read it. It's called in Democrats and Dissenters. There's so many aspects of Gandhi's life. So I have a long essay. Those of you, just a brief background. The question is about Dharmanand Kosambi, whose son is more famous than him, Damodar Dharmanand Kosambi, D.D. Kosambi, the pioneer of Marxist methods in Indian history. So please read that essay. It's in my collection, Democrats and Dissenters. It's called The Life and Death of a Gandhian Buddhist. That's what it's called, because he was an extraordinary figure. He was a Buddhist, he was close to Gandhi, he fasted to death. He probably inspired Ambedkar, though Ambedkar never acknowledges it, right? He taught at Harvard, left Harvard to join the freedom struggle and go to jail. He was an amazing person. But, one of many such people.
Terrific. Okay, wonderful. Well, I think on that note, reminder, upstairs there's a following a reception, and if you have copies of the book like me, you can have Ram sign it. And we'll just thank you, Ram, for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.